It's time for the No Nonsense Roundtable. Insights to capture your imagination from people you know and people you'd like to know about. Each week, a different guest from a different walk of life. Now, here is the host of the No Nonsense Roundtable, Dom Geneva.
So good morning. You're listening to another edition of the No Nonsense Roundtable here every Saturday, 10 to 11 on News Radio Wham 1180. And always the old shows or previous shows, however you want to call them, are on nononsenseroundtable.com. Just go where it says previous shows. You can get them as iHeart Podcasts or as YouTubes. And today I have a very interesting guest. Her name is Sarah Cedeño. Is that the way you pronounce that?
Yes, that's right.
And she is a professor at Brockport. And it's kind of interesting the way we met, because we had this I call it an alleged book signing back. Yeah.
You don't give it enough credit.
Well, I think we had, every once in a while you try something, and I guess that was the day that we were supposed to get the 12 feet of snow or something like that. And I swear, I think we had more authors than we had people that came to buy the books. But that's how we met. And sometimes, some things are just the way they are. And delighted to have you in the studio because you have an interesting story. You wrote your book, and we're going to be talking about that. But welcome to the No Nonsense Roundtable studios.
Thank you, Dom. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, let's talk. I think we're going to start every show with the question, at 10 years old, what did you want to do?
Well, it's funny that you ask this, because I was going through some papers. My mom always saved those report cards that used to come in big envelopes and are now just kind of like you have to check in on an app. But they used to have the big envelopes, and so I would stuff everything in there as I was getting older, and we ended up keeping them, and I went through them, and I found my aptitude test from middle school, and the question was, and basically what you're doing is you're taking all these tests to find out what you're drawn to. And my two things were a teacher and an author. And ironically, but really, had you asked me before I was in middle school taking those aptitude tests, I wanted to be a cashier at the college at Brockport where my mom worked.
Okay.
She worked at the Union Square, which was the cafeteria on campus. And so on Take Your Daughter to Work Day, I would always go with my mom, and we would take the money and we would chat with all the instructors. And I just thought it was the best thing ever, talking to everybody who went through there.
So you're a Rochesterian?
I am actually, yes, I am from Brockport.
Okay.
Born and raised.
Well, close enough.
Yes, close.
And where'd you go to school?
Well, I went to school at Brockport. I went all through the Central School District. And then I got my bachelor's in English with a concentration in creative writing in 2004. My master's from Brockport in creative writing in 2006. So I haven't really left Brockport. I knew that when I was growing up, I was much more of a humanities people person, because I was really into local history of my town. I was really into just like going to work with my mom when I would go and, meeting people. And always I was just focused on the people in front of me and the art in front of me. And, we can draw, we can write. So that was something that I was always interested in. But when I first started going to college at Brockport, before I declared my major as a creative writing major, I had originally been a communications major, and I had written an article or two for The Stylist, and I had taken some news writing classes, and at the same time I had also taken a intro to creative writing course because I loved creative writing. I didn't necessarily think at that time that was what I was going to enroll in. I was thinking more along the line of communications, journalism. But when I took the creative writing course, at the same time I was taking the news writing course, I found the draw was really clear to me that I really wanted to be in writing creatively, because they're so opposite. You've got like something so fact-based and something so emotionally based that they,
Yeah. So you are teaching English now?
Yeah, I teach all kinds of writing. I've taught business writing. I've taught creative writing. I teach composition. So
what's the most rewarding thing about teaching what you're teaching?
So we just finished the semester. Every semester I talk to my husband throughout the whole process, and there are always students that you become closer to because they maybe feel like a connection that they haven't had from an instructor before. And I think also probably teaching creative writing opens you up to know your students in ways that other instructors might not get to know their students. I was talking to you earlier about that student with the narrative essay. And so what happens is basically you walk into this classroom at the beginning of the semester and you see all these faces, and you work with them to get them to realize their own stories and to get them to come forward with what just their lives, where they've been so far and what they see some of their conflicts have been. And so I think what happens is I get to know students on a very different level and on a very human level. And it makes it difficult sometimes because you do get that sort of, it's sort of like not an exhaustion, but you give a lot of energy. And so there are times when you're like, oh, like teaching becomes more than teaching. It becomes more like family, almost, not maybe family is the wrong word, but you become more invested. And, you see these students who are away from home and, they're looking for some kind of guidance and mentorship. And I think that, when they're writing personally and creatively, that kind of opens you up for that.
Well, it sounds very similar to what I talked to Scott Petoniak about. Everybody knows Scott Petoniak, the famous sports writer here in Rochester. But he talks about sports as a vehicle to discuss the human condition. It's not just sports and statistics and box scores.
Right. And I mean, even when that, it's important that you say that, because a lot of students, when they come to college, the first essay that they write when they're in a composition class is a narrative essay. Every student has to take college composition when they go to school, when they go to a university or something similar. And they usually start with a narrative essay. And those narrative essays are often about sports, are often about what their interests were in school. And I feel like, they explore things that, those are their experiences.
I'm laughing because I remember, I don't know where I was in my education. I don't know if it was middle school or it had to be middle school. And the teacher said, I want you to write a composition about what you did during the summer. And the first thing. And it's like, we didn't do anything. My family, we didn't go anywhere. We didn't do anything. There was nothing to talk about. But you were talking about this student that you said that was, sort of had that feeling that there was nothing to talk about, but you drew him out. And that's got to be a talent.
Well, I think that when students are initially, for many reasons, it could be because they don't recognize their stories. It could be because they don't feel comfortable sharing with somebody who is their instructor. And I think they come into college, I always have to tell them, we're not working against you. I feel like a lot of students view instructors and teachers as though they're working against them. I know that my son sort of felt that way. And so they have this like bar up. Like, I think it's maybe just the evaluation part of things. Yeah. Like, you're looking at me, you're looking at my work and you're judging it. You're trying to get a grade. And I think that that's part of just trying to get them to think that like we're working. I always tell them I'm working with you. I don't want to see you fail. Like, I had a student in my classroom this semester. I called him in for office hours and I said, like, you can pass this class. If you don't pass this class, it's because you're deciding not to. Like, I don't want you to fail. Like, these are the opportunities. And so I think that once they start to realize that, like, it's kind of funny that we don't realize that we're all just human beings trying to help each other, Yeah.
Okay, we're going to talk more about that. And plus, we're going to be talking about, over the next, 45 minutes, we're going to be talking about your book. But we'll be right back after this. Well, we're back talking to Sarah Cedeño, a professor at Brockport College, English teacher, and author yourself.
Yeah.
So, let's start a little foray into this book, and we can always pick up a little bit later. But the title of the book is
Not Something We Discuss Often.
And what is something we don't discuss often?
Well, the chapbook, the tagline I've given it is they're essays on womanhood and illness. So a lot of these essays really just grow out of, I guess, thoughts that have come into being since I was diagnosed with MS, since I was raising my sons, since, just life as it happens and negotiating life with an illness and children and, just the world as it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my sister has MS, and it seems with her it's not it's not as serious as it was some people's. But when were you diagnosed with MS?
I was diagnosed with MS in 2006. I was 24, and I was finishing up my master's, and I had a 3-week-long spell of vertigo that we just couldn't figure out what it was. And eventually I was in the hospital with on all kinds of pain meds. I think they were giving me, or not pain meds, but it was a Dilaudid. And the only thing, I would leave the hospital when the vertigo would stop. So whatever medicine they were giving me had quenched it, had just given, now I know, had gotten rid of the inflammation. And then we had found out that it was either an MRI or via MRI if it was a brain tumor or MS. And yeah, it was MS. And, I think I didn't write about MS for the first 10 years after my diagnosis. I didn't even try. The first thing a lot of my colleagues said to me, oh, now you have material, you have something to write about. And I was like, no, and I said to them, I don't want to be the MS writer. It's not that's not why I want to write. I want to write because I'm a writer. And so, I didn't write about it for a long time because I think at that point I was dealing with it as a thing I could forget that I had. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that had infiltrated into my entire, my everyday life, every moment of every day. And so over the course of, raising children, having children, things started to become more permanent. For example, my hands are pretty numb. I've started tripping more. And so there are these little things that creep up. And so you start to try to make sense of what is this that's happening. And you have to kind of balance all of those things against this disease that you thought you had to manage on. You had managed. Mm-hmm. My great uncle also had MS, and he was in a wheelchair for a lot of his adult life. And it's not that way anymore because we have so many disease modifying therapies. But you're still just kind of going through this life slowly. You don't trust your body as much, I guess, is the thing. Yeah.
And you're probably concerned about where this is going, I would think, right?
Yeah. One of my frustrations, I think, with illness right now is that we have all of these diagnostic tools, and we have MRIs, and we have all this information. We don't know everything, but doctors, I feel are reluctant to look at your MRIs and just give you a sense of what kind of what kind of symptoms you could expect and your prognosis, which I think I understand the danger of the prognosis, but when you have a certain number of MRIs that kind of are collecting lesions, you can kind of say, okay, so that you're not realizing limitations when you're in public, which is, I think, the hardest part about for people with MS, is that, you can kind of look at the MRIs and kind of see where this might impact you in the future so that, just maybe try to modify ahead of time what's going on in your life. So
the book that you wrote is not a journey about MS. It's a series of essays. And let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I guess the story of the chapbook is really more how it came together than how I wrote it. As usually, well, I spent a lot of time writing essays that were sometimes about MS, sometimes about parenting, sometimes about marriage. And so one of the essays that I had written, Future Care Instructions for Your Wife with Multiple Sclerosis, happened to be the essay that got the attention of the publisher. And my friend Sarah Freely, who is also a Rochester writer, I guess the publisher had shared my essay, and then my friend Sarah Freely had posted and said, oh, she has a chapbook. I didn't really have a chapbook at the time. I just had a bunch of essays that I could turn into a chapbook.
Now, you have to excuse me because I'm uneducated about this. I've never heard the word chapbook before. Maybe I'm a little too naive or something. But what makes up a chapbook? Okay,
so chapbooks, they're becoming more popular now. They started out usually with poetry. Chapbooks usually around like between 30, 40, 50 pages. And simply like a book, sort of brief. And I guess the publisher came up with the idea of the chapbook at a chapbook series that they were starting. And that was when Sarah had said, okay, yeah, she has this chapbook. And so when I thought of compiling a chapbook, I thought, okay, so I just need like a few essays that I felt like worked together. And ironically, when I went back and looked at like the first 5 or so essays that I had been writing over the course of like a 10-year period, they worked together. So they did work as a chapbook. And so basically it is when they get the name chapbook, where it's like sort of like a chapter of a book. Right?
Okay.
So like a shorter version of a book.
All right.
So I've the essays that I ended up including, the first one is about being diagnosed with MS, but then it goes on for just like the experience of just growing up female, growing up as a petite woman in a university setting, and or even in a traditional with a traditional Italian mother who is very traditionally Italian. But yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is just realizing, what it means to be a woman in the world, raising kids, trying to navigate, suburbia, trying to navigate teaching students. I have one essay in the book, sort of like the spine essay. It's called Aftermath, and it sort of my great aunt Andy was a hoarder, and we found out after she had fallen, and the mail started accumulating outside her house, and she had gone into the hospital and passed shortly thereafter, and she had left the house and all of its contents to my father. And so that's one of the essays, and in that essay, I've always been interested in history. So I kind of go through the historical objects that we find, try to figure out more about my Aunt Andy, who obviously had some things she was struggling with, and try to understand more. It's a variety.
Yeah. And I like the idea of a chapbook because I think a lot of people hesitate about picking up a book that's 700 pages long. Yeah.
Yeah. And attention spans are different now than they were before. And so.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to talk more about this when we come back, but I also want to know about the mood and humor and other things that you have in these chapters in the chapbook.
Yeah.
Right after this news break. Well, you're back listening to the No Nonsense Roundtable. We're here with Sarah Cedeño. I love that name. That sounds so lyrical. Sarah Cedeño. So, and she is a professor at Brockport College and an author, and we're talking about her book. Now, let's talk about first the creative process. I mean, do you have a special place that you write, or is it an office or someplace quiet? Do you go?
Yeah, I used to write on my couch. And it's just about being like in a comfortable space for me. So like I have to usually like, I like to sit with like my feet under me, or I like to sit like up. I don't like to like be too like postured at a desk or anything. So I really don't write at a desk very often. A lot of times with the creative process, I'll get an idea in my mind for something I want to write, and then I'll just try not to write anything about it for a while. And I'll keep it in my mind while I'm going out and doing other things. And then usually what will happen is this, like, it doesn't seem like it can be real, but it's like this sort of coalescing of three things. It's usually three things that comes together in your mind that happens like partly in the real world, partly in your brain, and partly in the, like the making sense of the two things. Yeah. So then you run to the computer, or you try to make some notes down in a notebook, and then it.
Yeah, I can understand what you're talking about. I've written a couple of op-eds and whatever, and my thing is to be stuck in the car. I mean, if you're in the car and you don't have you turn the radio off and you're just driving, and then your mind goes where it's really not involved and it's really not involved. I mean, it's sort of this zone that you're in. You're shaking your head. Yes, I think you have the same feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there is something about being the movement and being in your mind at the same time. There are people who will. Joyce Carol Oates used to run miles before she would ever like sit down and write anything. And so she would say that she would often actually have the whole story she was writing worked out before she would actually put pen to paper. So, I mean, people all work their different ways. And I guess when you try to capture it, it's like a mouse, like in a cup. You're like, okay, I can get it. I feel like I know where this idea is going, Sorry.
No. But no, I have caught mice in cups, and that's a whole nother show. You don't crush the mouse. You have to get the mouse. They put something underneath the cup to get the mouse, and then you throw the mouse outside, right?
Yeah, you have to be careful about it. You don't want to destroy the idea.
Yeah,
you gotta give it some space and let it.
Yeah. So let's, I like selling things sometimes. So let's go over the name of the book again.
Not something we discuss often.
And I would imagine you can get a copy at, it's Brockport. So it's
Liftbridge,
yeah. Now, I was there a few months ago, and John Love, who is the owner of Bob Johnson Auto Group there, gave a live talk on his book, You Failed Me, which was really wonderful. It was great to hear the author talk. Now, have you done that?
I have not given any reading at Liftbridge. I know they have the book. I'm actually giving a reading at Brockport, the Writers Forum.
Okay.
And that is February 15th.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Liftbridge usually brings their books to that location when we do readings for the college. It's part of the college's writer's craft class. They bring in 5 every semester. The Writers Forum is an organization on Brockport's campus, and it's the longest continuously running reading series in America. And it was started in 1967. And so like, if you have like big name authors in your mind, like they've all been to the Writers Forum, like Allen Ginsberg, William Stafford. I think William Stafford might've been there, maybe not. But like Anne Sexton, Mary Gaitskill's been there, but they don't have her on the archived digitized interviews. But you can anyway go see these digitized interviews, and they're there in black and white, and they're all sitting around a table and they're smoking cigarettes and having a drink during the interviews. So yeah, it's part of the Writers Forum series. And so on campus, we have like 5 contemporary writers come in every semester. So I'll be part of that. In the spring. So
I was leading you into a direction. So why don't you give us some reading of something in your book now?
Sure. So what I'll do is I'll just read the first 3 paragraphs of The Healer. The Healer I wrote 10 years, 10 years after I was diagnosed with MS, just because, you know, like you have to have the idea in your head and it's not ready until it's not ready. And so one day it just kind of hit me that I was ready to write the essay. The Healer. Bob the Healer wore work boots and jeans. In my memory, there's a hard hat on his head. There were amethysts and rose quartzes and some kind of smoky, swirly white stones on my cousin's dining room table. I still have them somewhere in a jewelry box amidst tarnished rings from my youth. There were cups of coffee and packs of cigarettes, Seneca brand, that had been bought on the cheap at the reservation a half an hour away. The plan was to heal me. Corey, my boyfriend of about 6 months, was there. 2 weeks before, I'd come out of the shower in a towel and promptly fallen from vertigo. He'd peeled me off the hardwood floors of my grad school apartment. I'm dying, just leave me here, I'd said, and then threw up for hours.
Ooh. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, it gets funnier. As you it does.
Well, I mean, I'm laughing because it's funnier. I mean, what give me a little bit of the funny part, because so far that sounded very beautiful and lyrical, but I
thank you.
Exactly funny, but go ahead.
I'm going to skip a paragraph down so that I can get into some humor.
Okay.
So here was Bob on a humid, cloudy day that would lead to a thunderstorm we would think was the consequence of healing energy. The kind that would remove the lesions from the part of my brain that controlled my balance. Though in reality, the most that would happen to fix my brain already had. An intravenous infusion of steroids that turned the fizz of the lesion to plaque, a scar that would make me wobbly as a toddler at inopportune moments. But at that time, every bolt of lightning was a prayer. My mom tapped her cigarette in the ashtray and told me to stop giggling. Bob reminded me to uncross my legs so not to impede the energy. The smoke from my mother's, my aunt's, and my cousin Seneca's ambled into the air. Somewhere amidst the three of them was a rosary.
I like that. The whole visuals. Well, you have a scene in there, and you have something with an aroma, the cigarettes, and you have the sound. You have everything in there.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah, it's a little storytelling.
Yeah. Well, the creative process is so interesting. Some people are creative in, it always amazes me. You see somebody playing a guitar or somebody crafting words that you did. The adjectives and adverbs that you have that create this mood and this feeling. It's what's the difference between prose and poetry? That's prose you're doing there, right? Isn't that what that is?
This is prose. Poetry, I mean, when I go through this with my students, usually what we do is we talk about the form. But there is a point where like prose and poetry sort of like mingle and it becomes more lyrical. I think that part of like the personal essay is that it is lyrical. And so there is kind of this like blend between what's direct and linear and what's more, meandery.
Yeah, sounds awfully interesting. I'd love to hear you do more of the reading. We have another break that we're going to take, and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back. You're listening to the No Nonsense Roundtable. We're here with Sarah Cedeño, who is a professor at Brockport and an author, and an observer of the human condition. That's so.
That's a good title.
I'm a stinker here. I really am. So, okay, you mentioned three things during one of our segments just now, and one was MS, and we talk about that, and then you said parenting and marriage.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about parenting and marriage. And it doesn't necessarily have to do anything with the book, but if you could probably sell more books.
They're very brief glimpses of my sons in these books, but I have to be very careful about writing about them because they are humans with their own lives.
Well, you have to be very careful about saying something over the radio about them too.
Also,
because,
noted.
Yes, because their friends will tell them, I found that out. Yes, it is. So give me some comments. Give me some thoughts.
I think that, right now I have a lot of nieces and nephews who are at the point that I was when I was just starting some of these essays. And, you see them growing up with their families and trying to figure out the right steps to do at the right time. And I feel like when I was going through a lot of the writing of these essays, life just kind of like came at you, like at that age, like wave after wave. It's like you're married and then, or you're finishing college, or you're buying a house, or you're like, oh gosh, I have to, have children soon, or, we got to get a dog if we're going to be a dog family. And so I feel like there's so much, almost too much to be able to grab it all as it's coming at you. So I feel like reflecting on it was something that was essential. I think with parenting, you want my advice?
Well,
you probably give better advice than I do.
No, there's like,
well,
me and Nielsen says we have 10,500 other people that want to hear your advice. So go ahead.
Well, I've got 2 boys now. And so that has become something to navigate as I look at how do I get them to I'm a female representation in their life. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I get them to understand or give them the tools to communicate with others, especially somebody who might have a different mindset than you. And so I try to, just be very plain spoken and honest. I don't really, I want them to be able to tell me anything. I'm very candid, like off the cuff with them. They know so much. I don't really shield them from a lot of things that happen in the world, just because I feel like I want them more than anything to be prepared for anything, to know that things will be okay, even if they suck and go really wrong. Like, even if we do have COVID or a pandemic, we can talk about all these things. Really, I guess my idea about parenting, now that I've talked it through, and kind of does go along with the book, is not something we discuss often. Is I feel like I was always the one in my family who wanted to get to the bottom of things, who wanted to talk about things, who wanted to understand. Not to say that they didn't want to understand, but that like I always am drawn to the troubles and the conflict as a way to sort of, maybe it's a safeguard or a shield. And so when I talk to my sons, I'm like very, here, this is how this is going. And you're probably going to encounter this horrible thing, but this is okay. Because if you encounter this horrible thing, there are also these things that can help. But I try not to shield them from the horrors of the world, but instead try to just talk to them in a sort of candid, funny, comedic way about it.
I think if I was to paraphrase what you're saying, it's that you want your sons to see get an essence of what it is to be a woman, and I guess it's these days you say role model all the time. I don't know if role model is really the right word, but to have some type of essence of what you are and what you've gone through, what you've accomplished, and to have that perspective. And quite frankly, I feel the same thing with my girls. This is what a man is like. Yeah. And my wife, to her benefit, will say that to the girls when they have a question about something. Well, talk to your dad. Yeah. Talk to your dad about that, because he's a guy, he's a man, and you can trust what he says. And I really do appreciate that. Yeah,
I mean, there are different ways that we think of things, and I discover, I was at a hockey tournament in Lake Placid this weekend, and I found out the more conversations that I was having with other parents, and who largely ended up being the mothers, because just how, as things are changing, but slowly, the fathers are on the bench coaching, and generally a lot of the mothers are on the bleachers watching, but we end up kind of finding that we all have these very similar ideas and similar feelings about the things that happen in the world, and our kids, they're even on their team. And so I feel like it's really good to know other perspectives, and something that's a little bit outside of what you might traditionally. There's a difference in the mindset between a man and a woman.
Yeah. So let's lighten things up a little bit. You said something else that I haven't brought up to you yet. Traditional Italian mother. Okay, you're a professor in English, and you were an English major. Define traditional Italian mother. I can tell you what mine was, but go ahead. Tell me what yours is.
So my traditional Italian mother, I'll tell you in very specifics, always wanted me to be dainty, always wanted me to make sure that I was like hosting well. She never would have said hosting. She would, do you want coffee? Do you want, and I even wrote a little like story about this when I was little, that there was just this catastrophic thing that had happened. And I said, oh, everything was okay. And then my mom said, do you want something to eat? And I said, yes. And so, yeah, feeding, eating, drinking coffee, everything, food will make it better. It's very protective. Do not go outside without your bubble suit. Like,
that's exactly, yes. That's exactly, that's very much it.
So worried about everything. Anxiety was a way of life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My mom was the same way. I mean, but like you, I was small. So she was always kind of protecting me. Yeah. Try as best as she could. And, she pointed me in some direction. I love to tell this story that she said to me once. She goes, it's okay to be childlike, but not childish. If you want to play with toys, and you can see the cars I have here in my office. You want to play with toys, you want to have a model airplane, go right ahead, but it's not okay to be childish.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it does make sense.
And the food.
Yeah, the food. Oh my gosh, the food. Get out.
Does she pass on the recipes to you?
Yeah, she has. Well, okay. So my mom. Her father's family came over from Italy in 1918, and my grandfather died when he was 35. And so a lot of her Italian, actually, that's part of the obsession of it, is that I don't really know a lot about her family because I have that missing link. So yeah, she's kind of modified a lot of her Italian cooking to fit what my dad likes. Like, we don't have homemade sauce. Yeah. We have like, the bolognese doesn't have carrots in it. It's just very,
Okay.
Kind of dumb.
Okay, I'll say one word: sfogliatelle.
I don't know what that is.
Oh my Lord, you don't know what it is. I'll have to tell you. We're running out of time. I'll have to tell you. It's a pastry. It looks like a clam. It's like crunchy. It's really, really good. And
must have been lost.
No. It takes you like 6 months to be able to pronounce it. So let's talk about the name of your book again and where to get it.
Not something we discuss often. We have it on Amazon. The publisher is Harbor Editions. They have a website, and Liftbridge Books in Brockport has it.
Well, it's been delightful having you over. And
Thank
then
you.
We're going to have you over for some coffee and some sfogliatelle.
Yeah.
You can look that up when you get there.
Yeah, I have to figure out how to spell it.
Well, it's impossible to spell and almost impossible to say. So we'll discover that later sometime off the air. But until next week, it's a No Nonsense Roundtable, 10 to 11 on News Radio Wham 1180. Thanks for listening. Well, thanks for watching this YouTube. If you liked it, please like and share.